Hello folks, this is Pamela Young from GrowthCurv bringing you Thrive 2030, and today I have a return visitor. Robbie McRobbie is the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Rugby Union, and I've asked him to return because we spoke in 2021, about 2 years ago, and his journey has been a turbulent one but finished on a high in the last couple of weeks with the Rugby Sevens international event. And you probably are feeling a bit tired after that massive event, Robbie. Welcome back to Thrive 2030. How are you feeling?
Well, thank you for having me back, Pamela. Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Weary, but very happy after what was a tremendous Hong Kong Sevens. Went extremely well. But as you say, there's certainly been a bit of a curve to my journey over the last couple of years and the organisation's journey. But I'm glad to say quite a positive ending to the story.
Look, I'm so pleased to hear it, which is why I reached out to you again just in the last couple of weeks to see if you would come back and give us a return journey. Because when we spoke 2 years ago, it was the beginning of a very tough time for everyone with the health crisis, putting the brakes on everybody. And for your business, it was actually quite a challenge because your Rugby Sevens is your very big event of the year. And I think from memory, it generated 90 or 95% of your annual income. And so that caused a massive challenge for you as an organisation and for you as the chief executive. But I also remember your concerns at the time about because the event had slowed, you were looking at how were you going to adapt the business model and support many of the, I think 21 rugby clubs that you have across Hong Kong and all those community outreach programs that you do for youth. And I recall, you were looking for ways to continue funding that. So if we just sort of backtrack to when we had that last conversation, sort of, I think it was, the third quarter of 2021, what was the journey like? How did you survive? And how did you get back on top, as you have done with the more recent 2 events of Rugby Sevens, end of 2022, and again, the one that's just occurred in April 23. So maybe start with the end of 21 when we left off. How did you get on with redesigning that business model?
So I guess that was probably the back end of 21. We had a third round of redundancies and retrenchment. So that's probably the low point for the business. By that stage, we'd lost about 250 million Hong Kong dollars. We'd ended up making half the staff redundant. So we went into COVID with 150 full-time staff. We came out of it with 75. And we also had a significant number of staff resignations as well. At that point, if you were working in the events industry in Hong Kong, well, in fact, worldwide, even still at that stage, it wasn't the most stable occupation to be in. Yeah. So there was a bit of an exodus, but not just the Hong Kong Rugby Union, but the sports and events industry. So we were not in a great place. In terms of the strategy that we talked a bit about last time, we did have some success with that. Mm-hmm. So what we tried to do was chunk down the business into functional areas and then see to what extent we could try and make them more financially self-sufficient, self-sustainable, particularly within the community with our community foundation, which is, in fact, we just rebranded as Rugby for Good. We were able to bring in significant additional funding sources, particularly from the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and that enabled us to secure both those staff positions, but also, very importantly, the programs that we were delivering in the community. So that was a success, with the representative teams largely due to their own individual success on the playing field. We were quite lucky with that because it meant that, for example, our men's and women's sevens programs retained their funding at the Hong Kong Sports Institute, so they were able to come through the period largely intact. Mm-hmm. So there were some wins, but overall, we still, as you quite rightly well remembered, 95% of our revenue was dependent on having a Rugby Sevens, and by that stage, well, you can work it back. I don't know. That was probably about 5 or 6 occasions when we'd had to first postpone and then cancel the rugby sevens. And it was only on the first occasion that we had any insurance cover, because obviously, as we all know, after that, it was impossible to get COVID cancellation insurance. So we were just kind of hanging in there, relying on the remaining reserves that we had in the bank. As I say, cutting our operating expenditure down to a bare minimum, and then just hoping beyond hope that at some point the pandemic would lift, restrictions would lift, and we would be able to actually get back to delivering an event.
Yeah, so that was I suppose fortuitous that you had the jockey club come to your aid. I did read about the investments that they provided to you and the support that they have provided, and you picked off certain charities, didn't you, for them to support, which helped certain groups. I think it was a number of the women's clubs and the children's programs. Yeah.
So I mean, certainly very, very fortuitous that the jockey club stepped in. I mean, I think, I suppose, to pay tribute to my colleagues who had built up those programs. I mean, the fact that we were the jockey club were interested was because we've got a strong track record of delivering across these areas, and we had these programs running. We didn't create the programs, especially for the jockey club. It was already, we were working in gender equality, we were working with special needs groups. So it was a very good fit. But certainly, I mean, the jockey club were very good during that whole period, to be honest, not just with ourselves, but they were very supportive across the NGO community in Hong Kong, because they recognised that a lot of organisations who were doing increasingly important work during COVID, particularly young people, had sort of traditional sources of revenue cut off. Yes. So yeah, we were very grateful that they stepped up.
What did you draw upon during this challenging time as the chief executive? In terms of your own personal strength, I mean, do you sort of reflect back on what you used? Did you do I don't know, meditation or mindfulness, or hang out with mates and sort of draw upon their experience? I mean, how did you cope? This is a really challenging few years, and as you say, when you're watching your reserves dropping year after year, wondering how much longer can we hold this together until we're allowed to run our next Sevens event. How did you get through it as a chief executive? What did you draw on?
Alcohol.
Did you? Good on you.
No, I mean, it's a flippant answer. Some degree of truth in it, but not a particularly healthy way. But yeah, I mean, friends, peer support was important. Also, my management team, the board. Yes. Well, I've got to say, Pamela, I got a lot wrong in retrospect, and I've reflected a lot on it, because obviously it was a fairly traumatic journey, but for me as a CEO, I got quite a lot wrong, and I would have done quite a lot differently in retrospect. The main problem, I think, or the main misdirection for me was I spent an awful lot of time worrying about stuff that I couldn't affect and couldn't change, and I took my eye off the ball with the small things that actually at the time didn't seem important, but in retrospect were. So in simple terms, lying awake at night worrying about the pandemic, there was nothing I could do to change that. I couldn't go out and vaccinate everybody in Hong Kong. That wasn't within my powers or my remit to do anything about.
Yeah.
But when it came to things like ensuring that we still maintain proper staff appraisals and the staff workplace and doing kind of leave or retention interviews and all these types of stuff, a lot of it kind of at the time I thought, what's the point? We could be out of business next month.
Yes.
So
let those go.
Yeah. So, but actually, at a time when the staff obviously had great insecurity and were really concerned, these were the little things that really they were
they
would have made a difference. And so I got that badly wrong. And when we then eventually, as as we'll come on to, when we did start coming out, we were quite a long way behind the curveball in terms of all of that stuff, which we just neglected during that period, and we had to start rebuilding. And it's still, we're very much in a cultural rebuilding phase within the organization. And I think that would have happened. I think we would have had these issues anyway. But I think in retrospect, myself and my management team, but largely led by me, if we had kept our eye on the ball a bit more during that period, then it would have been an easier process coming out of it.
You're probably not alone in that, so don't beat yourself up too badly about that. The most wonderful thing is that you've reflected on it, you're looking back at it, and you've identified that you were focusing in on what might have seemed at the time the most important thing, because it was unheard of. None of us had had the experience of a global pandemic before, and so there was a great deal of shock and reaction, and it was such an unknown thing. So you will not be alone in that. However, the good thing is that you've reflected back, and there's been a massive learning, and I'm sure that you'll lead and manage the business completely differently going forward. You just made a comment about readjusting the culture. Can you just explain what you meant by that? What did you have to do in order to help the business to pivot?
Well, I mean, it's still very much an ongoing process. I mean, I think, as I say, the combination of, so with the redundancies, and as I say, the fact that working within our sector was not the greatest place to be, but it became a bit of a snowball effect, because people had worked alongside colleagues, friends for all this sort of time. They were coming into work, and the desk next to them was empty, and the person who they had gone for lunch with every day and shared a joke with and relationship with was no longer there. So, I mean, a lot of this stickiness from the organisation started to fall apart, which again is, I suppose, an interesting thing when it comes to looking at things like working from home and all of these things. Actually, it's easy to kind of shift to working from home in some regards, but it was interesting that the ties that bind, if you like, a lot of it was very much, as I say, that physical connectivity and friendship. And when that started to unravel, so that's how we ended up with, I mean, over 40 resignations on top of redundancies, and for people to resign during a period where obviously the economy at large wasn't that great. So we did.
So that was unexpected. You lost 40 people through resignations that you didn't have on your redundancy list. So that must have made it very challenging. Did you?
It was, and then so then just to if you like, to add to our woes, replacing them, because obviously we then dipped below. So we'd already, through redundancies, we'd come down to like the minimum number of staff that we need to continue doing what we're doing, and also get ready to take advantage when we can go back to running sevens, etc. We're ready to move back. So then, if there were further resignations beyond that, then we did have to replace it like for like. But we then came into this problem, which is not unique to Hong Kong at all, but certainly quite severe here, which is staff shortage. So we couldn't find people. So the talent pool, because again, people who are out there weren't really looking to move into the events and sports sector.
No.
So that was a real struggle. In fact, I suppose the one nice thing about it all is that we've ended up, on the back of all of this, we've actually ended up re-employing a number of staff who initially had to make redundant. So it is, and I think, I mean, again, obviously the whole process was, we managed it as well as we possibly could.
Yeah.
I think the fact that they are still willing to come back and work for the organisation, means that at least for some of them, we were able to rationalise and explain why this was happening, and they understood, and we left on good terms, and we kept in contact with them, and so they were willing to come back to work for us, and so that, I guess, is quite so there are some nice end stories, if you like, from that point of view. But the turnover, so to go back to the culture question, the turnover of staff and the institutional knowledge and history and culture that the culture is, as we all know, is made up by the individuals, had all kind of leaked away.
Yes.
So we got a lot of people who were new to the organisation, had never done rugby sevens before, which created its own challenges when we finally managed to get back to doing one.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying it's still very much, we're still in a rebuilding phase when it comes to that, because it's, you know, apart from a startup, that many new individuals in the organisation is obviously very unusual.
Yes, to have such a huge percentage of people changing, as you say, you lose that institutional knowledge, you lose that stickiness. You do gain fresh perspectives and new skills. So there's some upsides to it. But you're right. You probably are in a very unusual state, a little bit more like a newer business, a startup business, where you're bringing in a lot of new blood, and therefore your culture will be continually evolving on a day-to-day basis as people are trying to find their level, trying to find an understanding of, you know, how things get done around here. What are the beliefs and values upon which all the decisions of the past have been made? And a lot of those things are not overt or stated. They have to work them out. So it's going to be, you know, a challenging period, but clearly you've had a really good 6 months. So let's go back to mid 2022, when the tables started to turn for you, when you started to think about holding your first Rugby Sevens event of what, 3 years, towards the end of 2022. How did that come about?
So we had, so our normal window for the Rugby Sevens is April every year. And so what was happening during COVID was that this obviously we became quite practiced at this. So 3 months out, we have to make a decision, go, no go. So kind of the turn of the year, so January, we'd have to make a decision about April or December, January. And then, so normally the first point of call was, right, we can't go in April, so we'll postpone to November. So November was that second window in the year where it was possible for us to fit into the World Series calendar. So that had happened obviously a number of times, starting from April 20, it moved, etc. So 22, we made the decision, we're not going to be able to run it in April 2022. So we had postponed it in theory to November, November 22.
Yes.
But at that point, in fact, Hong Kong had just, so in kind of that, around that April 22 time, or January to May, if I remember correctly, we'd actually had a fairly serious flare-up of COVID. We had kind of gone back into further restrictions. So it wasn't looking that great. April, May started to improve a bit, but we were still, I think, fairly skeptical as to whether or not November would be possible. I guess the turning point for us came when the financial secretary, the government financial secretary, Paul Chan, came out at a public forum and said that in November, the government was planning on inviting some of the top bankers in the world to Hong Kong for a summit. And he specifically said, and we're going to do this immediately before the Hong Kong Rugby Sevens. So, as you can imagine, our ears kind of pricked up, and it was like, oh, well, that's
they're expecting us to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he doubled down on it. So about a week later, he made another statement to the same effect. There's going to be this banking conference, and it's going to be just before the Rugby Sevens. So I think that was the moment when we thought, right, okay, it is time to gird our loins, because this sounds like we could be on. The issue then was, because at that point, obviously, there were no other international events taking place.
At all.
At all. We were still...
2019. That was the last time you held it, wasn't it?
Yeah, but not just rugby events. There hadn't been anything. So we were still at that point in quarantine, so you still had to do. I won't get the time exactly right, but you still had to do at least a week hotel quarantine when you arrived in Hong Kong. We were still, everybody was having PCR tests and RAT tests, and we were all wearing masks and all this sort of stuff. So actually, the challenges of putting on an international event with 15 overseas teams, we only had the men scheduled for November.
Yes.
It was all of a sudden, it was like, well, we've got the indication from government that we can have a go, but how feasible is this really with all of these restrictions? So we then went through a very, very intense period of planning, working with various government departments, obviously with our own teams, with World Rugby, and we came up with a plan. And the plan, so the interesting way, the way that things switched then over the next few months. So the plan initially was a closed loop bubble. So we had to book out an entire hotel, a quarantine hotel.
Okay.
The teams, including the Hong Kong team, so the 15 overseas teams and the Hong Kong team, and all of the match officials and everybody else, had to come into the hotel, and within the hotel, they were PCR tested daily, and they weren't allowed to have any contact with anybody outside the bubble.
Okay.
So was
this going to be with a live audience? Were they going to allow you to bring in?
So the audience, the audience was okay. We were allowed up to 85% capacity of the stadium with social distancing. So there were groups, you could sit in a group of initially 8, and then it became a group of 10, then a group of 12, with a seat vacancy, with seat then gap. Everybody had to wear masks. Then there was a big debate about food and drink. Would food and drink be allowed? If it was allowed, only in certain areas, how would that work? The spectators could not have any contact with anybody inside the bubble. So,
what a challenge for you, trying to run an event of that size and, that magnitude with all those restrictions.
It was absolute, very, very expensive and very, very challenging.
Yes.
Now, so all of this we were kind of putting in place, readying for November.
Yeah.
And we had to get sign off from the Department of Health that they felt that we, mitigated all of the risks of infection, etc. So at the time, just to put it in context, that at that time, our concern was the overseas players and officials coming in with COVID and spreading COVID into the Hong Kong public. So that was the initial idea behind the closed loop bubble. Now, by the time we got to November, the situation in Hong Kong and the rest of the world had changed so significantly that we continued with the closed loop bubble, but it was to protect the players from catching COVID from the Hong Kong public. So it had gone completely a reversal. Okay. And the reason that we did that was because we were concerned that if too many of the players caught COVID, then they wouldn't be able to participate in the tournament. So we would have to cancel the tournament. Yeah. So we had to protect the players from catching COVID.
Yes.
So it was a complete reversal of the thinking when we started. The same concept worked, but it was a different group of people we were trying to protect.
It's bittersweet, isn't it? It's your first event for 3 years, and you had to put it on under such challenging conditions. So,
apart from the feasibility and the practicalities, we were there were very, very much two schools of thought in the community as to whether or not we should be doing this. There were those who hoped that our event would signal the start of, if you like, a return to some normality.
Yes.
There were others who actually were quite vociferous in their opinions that first of all, we would damage the event because it wouldn't be, because people were wearing masks and, when they could eat and drink and all that, we would end up damaging the Hong Kong Sevens brand. We would basically not be able to put on a successful event. And actually, we were losing an opportunity because we could have put greater pressure on the government to, to say, well, we're not going ahead with sevens until things are further relaxed.
Just to put a bit more weight on your shoulders, I see.
yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of real debate.
Yes.
Now, as it turned out, we, again, probably more luck than judgment, we kind of rode a wave of relaxation of restrictions as we moved towards November.
Okay.
Now, the problem was a lot of it was very last minute. So it wasn't until literally 10 days before the event that we finally got confirmation that spectators could eat, drink in the stadium.
Wow.
So it was real kind of,
Wow.
last minute stuff, which made the planning really difficult. So people went into that event. When I say people, I mean not just spectators, not just the teams. Honestly, me, myself, and our own staff.
Yes.
We didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
Expectations were fairly low. Is the reality. We'd sold 27,000 tickets, which was pretty good from our point of view because there were no overseas spectators. It was just a domestic audience.
Yes.
The sponsors had stuck by us, which was great. The corporate market was down, but we knew we'd got enough people who bought tickets to make it a reasonable event, but we just didn't know what the atmosphere was going to be like.
Okay.
And the honest truth was, it was amazing. It's probably the best sevens that I've ever experienced. And that wasn't because
good on you.
It wasn't me. It was
you and your new team that you'd cobbled back together.
But it was everybody. It was the entire stadium. There was so on Friday. So it's a 3-day tournament: Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday, I think people turned up and they were pretty skeptical, and it was like, we'll come and have a look, and if it doesn't, if it's no good, we won't come back Saturday and Sunday. And it was just the authorities, the police, the stadium staff were very user friendly. They're very pragmatic in terms of letting people take their masks off to drink and eat and stuff like that. And there was just like this huge sigh of relief from everybody. It was like, oh, how good it is to be back doing something not quite normal, but something fun and enjoyable and together and as a community.
Core business, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's your core business is to run that event.
So it was a wonderful atmosphere, and so many people coming up to the union staff and saying, thank you so much for doing this. It's so great to see Hong Kong actually getting back on track. And the teams, and the teams literally had PCR tests every day. They got something shoved up their nose, and they were great, and they were so patient, and they were so good natured about it. So everybody wanted it to be a success and wanted it to happen. So whilst it won't go down in the history books as our biggest or financially most successful or anything else, for me it was certainly the most emotional.
Absolutely. After 3 years of the journey, and after 3 years of not having any revenue, because as you said at the start, 95% of the revenue came from that event. So it's very exciting that you had that opportunity, and it's probably great that the financial secretary put you on the spot and said, we're going to run this banking event 2 minutes before the rugby sevens, because what he wanted you to do was to put it on so that he would be able to attract people from overseas to his event for the bankers. Okay, so can we jump forward now to April this year, when you again held the full rugby sevens, because I think in November 2022 it was men only. Yes, so this time around in April you had men and women, and you had the full contingent. So how did this one go? It seems to me by reading and watching the news that it was as sensational as ever.
It was great. It was actually the first time that we've had the core women's teams and the men's teams all together in the stadium, combined event. So there was a lot of rugby, but some really great rugby. And a lot of the other traditional elements that make the sevens so special were back. So the mini rugby games in the morning, the mini march past, the entertainment, the live bands, all of that we were able to bring back, and that was great. And then in the week before it, I mean, the sevens week is such an integral part of what we do. There were as well as the football club tennis tournament, which came back. We also had, there were more than 20 breakfasts, brunches, lunches, drinks and dinners, all the consulates and chambers of commerce and the societies and the rugby clubs, so all those events. So yeah, it was fantastic from that point of view. It was a really tight turnaround. We hadn't really appreciated from November to April.
Yeah.
We thought, oh well, it'll be kind of copy and paste. But you know, when you factor in Christmas, New Year, and then Chinese New Year,
yes,
actually it was a pretty condensed period for preparation, and inevitably, when you finish the event, it takes you a while to pick yourself back up. So it was a tight turnaround. I have to say, I think I'm pretty confident in saying that it will be the only time when there are 2 Hong Kong Sevens in one calendar series.
yes.
And that's probably quite a good thing.
Yes, I guess, because I guess you must be feeling that you didn't really have a moment to breathe between those first two, because the first one was a bit of a trial, wasn't it, to see how you were going to do it under those enormous constraints. And then you just on the back of that, you decide to go again and get ready for April, but as you say, with all those other activities. So as you're looking back now on your team, how do you feel they came together on the second time round, having had a dry run in November, and obviously perhaps you're still recruiting through that 6-month period as well, trying to bring the team up to full capacity. So how did you feel that the team did as you went through that 6-month period?
Very, 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 very proud of the way that they reacted, their commitment, their passion, and obviously just the sheer hard work that they put into, first of all, learn from November. So you know, we were very lucky that a great guy, good friend of the union, who's very experienced in events, etc., came in, turned around a wash-up report very quickly for us. So we tried to pick up some key learnings from November, which we were then able to implement in April. But the other thing is, I mean, again, this is, you know, from Hong Kong context, but also from the wider global context. So with that sort of, I talked about the recruitment of staff issue. What we're also learning to live with is that we've got some great people, particularly younger people, but they're not willing to come and work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So, you know, lifestyle, all that sort of stuff. They'll come in, they'll do consultancy, they'll do freelance, they'll do a few days a week and all that sort of stuff. And they're great, and they're worth the weight in gold. We couldn't have done it without them. But you know, we're quite a traditional organisation, so for us to learn to work around that,
adapt to that
is actually that's quite challenging.
Sorry to interrupt. Was that more about wanting to work from home and have that flexibility, or was that about the change in the gender, younger set, wanting to be more flexible in the way that they pick and choose their work?
It's the latter. So we've allowed the staff. We still allow them, if they want to work a couple of days from home, they can do that. So that doesn't seem to have been so much of an issue. In fact, to be honest, the majority of people, particularly in Hong Kong, because you know, we all live in tiny little flats in high-rise buildings, so people quite like coming to work, to be honest. Yes. So it's not so much that, it's more the younger, whatever generation they are, Pamela, but you know, and I respect it. I mean, I'm quite envious of it. I guess from my point of view, I'm more of a kind of I don't know, a coward, in as much as for me, the security of having a full-time job and having a medical plan and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you know, but nowadays, it seems that for a lot of them, they're willing to pick and choose and do things that interest them and they're passionate about and excite them, and that's great. It just makes it, as an employer, a little bit more challenging to harness that. You know, and ideally, I'd love to tie them all down and make them work for us full time. But they're just, you know, if you want to get that talent, they're just not all prepared to do that.
It's a sign of the times, isn't it, Robbie? Because we're never going to go back to people feeling that they absolutely must have the security of a 9-to-5 job because they've learned how to manage without that. And the world is still adapting. Organizations, in every country of the world is still adapting to not just working from home, but the changes that you're describing, which is this need, this preference for wanting to be independent and flexible, and to be able to pick and choose, which is going to be a very big issue going forward over the next 3, 5, 10 years as organizations work out how to make that successful for them.
Well, I think, just as I say, just in terms of the fact that all of the normal functions, whether it be HR, training, development, and that, we're geared up to full-time employees. So how do you adapt all of those different functional areas to cope with a more part-time, freelance, consultant type workforce? Yes.
So going forward, I mean, you've got, thankfully, 12 months now before you have to run another Rugby Sevens. You've now got some money in the bank because you've had 2 events in 5 months after a 3-year break. This is going to give you an opportunity, isn't it, to continue working on that business model, to continue to strengthen the organisation, to build the team as best as you can, and find a new way forward. What do you think will be the priority for you over the next 6 months as you do
that? Well, we've got quite an exciting new idea for an international event in November, actually. So
exciting.
Yeah, watch this space. So we're looking this time. It won't be sevens. It's 15-a-side rugby. It's international clubs. So we're looking at some very top rugby club names from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, South Africa, bringing them together and looking at some kind of variations. So it's like all we love about traditional 15s game, but in a faster, more exciting, vibrant format. So I guess it's kind of taking what we've learned from the sevens, and is it possible to then blend that with 15s? So that's the plan at the moment, which I think will be, hopefully, to go back to that, the business model. We've always wanted to develop a second event, additional revenue streams. So it would be great if we could develop something which then becomes an annual second event for us.
Fantastic. That sounds like a great aspiration. I'm sure that you will do fabulously at bringing that together, because that's your core skill, isn't it? Running rugby events, global rugby events. So listen, I'd like to close on to get a comment from you about the winners this year. I think the Kiwis did quite well, and it would be really nice to hear, how did that feel sitting on the sidelines watching the finals for both the men's and the women's tournaments?
Well, I mean, I think we do have to recognise Australia won in November, which was their first win in Hong Kong since 1988. So that was great for them, and that was nice as well, because the Aussies they kind of get traditionally a bit of stick in the stadium. It's very good natured, so that was nice. But for the 2 New Zealand teams to win, to see two hackers on the pitch at the end of the 2 finals, and it was really nice. The New Zealand Rugby Union CEO was there watching. It's great. They're such a wonderful rugby brand. They're very good friends to us at Hong Kong Rugby Union. So we were delighted to see that, and for the New Zealand men to then back it up by then winning the following week again in Singapore. It's been a bit of a purple patch for them. Purple patch for the All Blacks.
Good on you. Well, listen, Robbie, thank you so much for sharing that journey. You felt quite confident that you would pull through, but I did feel when we talked in 2021, it was clearly going to be a dry couple of seasons, and it was going to be a big challenge. And I congratulate you. You've done an amazing job at hanging on in there throughout those 3 years, and to run 2 events in the last 5 months has been amazing. So I wish you and your new team all the best. And we will continue to watch your development as we go forward. So thanks again for joining us on Thrive 2030 and giving us an update. It's really good to hear how you can come through and see the light and do such an amazing job at the end of such a big challenge that you faced. So all the best, Robbie.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks very much for the update. Talk soon.